I think one sort of new area of jeopardy that's kind of inserted itself in the last 24 hours is the news that Russia will be coming to talk about economic incentives for Donald Trump.
And today there are so many moving parts, so many views and voices and people with a stake in it when it comes to this Alaska summit. Let's try to make sense of it all with the Times' World Affairs editor Catherine Philp, who joins us from Kyiv. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
Let's start with the Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, who leads a Liberal opposition party. I spoke to her ahead of today and asked her about whether Ukraine would accept Russia occupying its land. This was her response.
The main question today and always remains who or what will make sure that Russia would not attack us again. Since 2014, when they first attacked us, we have been in dozens, maybe hundreds of ceasefire agreements with Russia. And we know for a fact that they will break their part. So what we need to know is how is this time going to be different?
So Kira Rudik there suggesting it's security guarantees that is important. Equally, we've had Russian officials on Times Radio before saying that land isn't important, but essentially, for their view, defanging Ukraine is what's important. Is that going to be the biggest battle for these talks, Ukraine's future relationship with the West?
It's certainly going to be a massive part of it because something that Vladimir Putin fundamentally does not agree with is the notion that Ukraine is a legitimate state of its own that is able to take its own decisions, and specifically the one it has done in the last decade plus, which is to move closer to the West. The issue of territory itself, and that how that balances against security guarantees. I mean, that I think Kira there is that's a nod towards a growing sense amongst Ukrainians that there is likely to be something almost forced upon them that involves the de facto partition of their country. The choice is how that is, recognised or not recognised. The fact that it is acknowledged could be a compromise. But then again, what happens to the rest of the country, and how can Vladimir Putin be prevented from simply coming back and relaunching a war for the rest of things if he does find himself pushed into a corner today by Trump, where he has to make some kind of offer to freeze the front line to dodge the most severe threatened economic consequences.
Nathan Sales, we had just before the break, former Trump State Department official, suggesting Putin might be a bit of a supplicant, was his word, because he's heading to US territory for these talks. Do you think Vladimir Putin will feel that way today?
I don't feel that way about him coming there, so I would even more strongly suggest he doesn't. No, far from being a supplicant, he is being received on the world stage and on American soil in a way that he hasn't now for years. He's been a pariah. He is now an indicted war criminal. There are 125 countries in the world where he couldn't have a meeting like this because he would be arrested and sent to The Hague to face war crimes trial. So no, to find himself on equal footing with the most powerful man in the world, the so-called leader of the free world, puts Putin exactly where he wants to be. It's almost inconceivable to me, and yet it seems to be the case, that Trump has agreed to do another joint press conference with him of the kind that went down in infamy in Helsinki in 2018. I just wonder, in this echo chamber that Trump lives in now, that he is so powerful an assailant in his MAGA movement, if there are people around him who've done enough to remind him that who Putin is, who this person who he has these nice chats with on the phone is, which is a former judo player and high-ranking KGB agent whose job it was to twist the thumbs of those he interviewed and get exactly what he wanted out of them.
No, we're less than a year into Donald Trump's second term, and with so many eye-popping moments, that probably will be one of them. How much, finally, Catherine, do you think there's a risk that for the Russians that this doesn't keep Trump happy and actually annoys him and drives him away? Because that was something that Kira Rudik was saying. That's her hope, is that it just lifts the veil on Vladimir Putin.
Yes, that's absolutely the hope here in Kyiv. I think one sort of new area of jeopardy that's kind of inserted itself in the last 24 hours is the news that Russia will be coming to talk about economic incentives for Donald Trump, things that are music to his ears and playing on his transactional side. Also reviving the talk of nuclear arms control. To replace what runs out almost imminently and has never been replaced because they haven't been talking. If Russia can sort of push the conversation onto that and ignore to as great an extent it can Ukraine, and focus on rebuilding the relationship between Russia and the US, that leaves a lot less time for Ukraine and potentially buys Putin more of the time that he wants to attempt to win it on the ground. Now, it may drift into another summit happening soon. I am personally very skeptical about whether Putin would attend a meeting with Zelensky there at all. But there is more on this agenda for both Trump and Putin than Ukraine, even though for the rest of the world, that is the absolutely number one issue we are all waiting for.
So many lines of approach and angles that these two leaders could take, and we know so little about what they will do. I'm sure we'll be hearing much more from you later today. Catherine Philp, The Times' World Affairs editor, we really appreciate your insight. The Times' view on this summit later, Trump eyes economic incentives from this summit in Alaska. That is not surprising, I think, knowing what we do about Donald Trump. What is on the table economically?
I think really one of the big questions about this is who is offering economic incentives to who. So you could view this summit as Donald Trump trying to offer financial benefits to Putin, so the opportunity to remove or reduce sanctions as an incentive for Putin to reduce or sort of introduce a ceasefire or at least reduce the violence in Ukraine. But you could also, obviously the alternative reading is that Putin is there to offer economic incentives to Trump to support his position on Ukraine, that at least the four major regions and possibly more are Russian and should remain so. So I think that's really unclear. If you're from Putin's perspective, the offer is probably centered on oil and gas. So prior to the war, there were a number of big Western oil majors that had large assets in the in Russia. Exxon owned 30% of the Sakhalin-1 plant. BP owned nearly 20% of Rosneft, the big Russian state gas producer. Shell had lots of operations in LNG, liquid natural gas. So there's lots of Western interest before, and a lot of those assets were either sort of forced to be sold or just outright taken away by the Kremlin. And then there's also lots of opportunity for Western oil and gas majors to drill in Russia, that oil fields that have been discovered and not yet exploited. All of those sorts of things are what Russia could potentially be offering to Trump. As I say, I think the offer the other way round is perhaps a little bit more complex. So the US sanctions on Russia have covered everything from financial services through to sort of holiday travel for leading Russian figures. All of those could potentially be tweaked, but it's not clear who needs to do what in order to unlock that.
We'll see if Drill Baby Drill extends to Russia as well. Nicholas Hyatt, investment manager at Wealth Club, thank you very much.